Welcome everyone to Smart Inclusion. This is our series of video conversations about the challenges and solutions in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And today we are talking with Ana Maria Santos. She is the co-creator and co-founder of Equitas Insight, which is a consultancy that drives diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. And Ana herself is a change driver. She is a capability builder with a passion for driving transformation that sticks for lasting and real impact. And I'm happy that Ana brings us an international perspective. She has 4 home countries, including Brazil, the United Kingdom, the United States, and Greece. And her background stretches from a very diverse perspective as well, from marketing, manufacturing, academia, and consulting for high growth business organizations. So thank you for joining me today, Ana.
My pleasure, Sylvia. Thanks for having me.
Well, we've been talking a little bit about the sharp growth in diversity, equity, and inclusion in the last couple of years. And there are a lot of studies out there. There's a lot of service providers. And on one hand, this is creating a sense of urgency, like a new sense of urgency that organizations need to do something. On the other hand, there's an overwhelming fragmentation of this information that's occurring. And this is kind of creating what we call analysis paralysis and a feeling of frustration that organizations and leaders cannot win no matter what you do. So I know you're a fan of trying to keep things simple, and this is a big mouthful, but you had told me that you like to structure your thoughts in threes. So for the sake of keeping our video short and sweet, let's talk about the 3 questions on how to drive diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts for that real and lasting impact. So the first question is, what are the 3 questions?
All right. Thank you again, Sylvia, for the very generous introduction and for having me here to talk about something that I'm incredibly passionate about. And why 3? I like to include the why I asked 3 questions and structure everything in 3s. Is because we know, and you might all be aware that neuroscience proves that our brains like simplifying things, and we retain information when we have like groups of 3. We group things naturally in 3. So hence 3. And my 3 questions that help me structure the thinking around DEI are why DEI is important. Yeah, you talked about, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second, about how documented it is out there by McKinsey and other research organizations, talking about the value of DEI. But this why that I'm talking about is why DEI is important for your organization. It's a personal matter. There's no DEI that's the same for every organization. So if you, as an organization, as a leader, as an employee, are thinking about DEI, we believe it's very important to make it personal and think in terms of why it's important to you. Second question is what? What needs to be done and what can be done about that? Yes, there's a lot of fragmentation. There's a lot of providers. So again, simplifying and prioritizing is an important thing. So we talk about that as well. And then ultimately, the third question for us is very important is who? Because many organizations talk about, oh, let's implement that. And they put, DEI councils or DEI, chief DEI officers and leaders, and assume that the whole responsibility is within that group. We like to demystify that. And so I like talking about the who is responsible for that as well. So these are the 3 questions.
Great. Well, now I'm going to ask you if you can elaborate on each one.
Right.
And what are the main challenges then around the why, the what, and the ever important who?
Right. Well, thank you for that. Because yes, I think let's break down these questions into their implications. So why? Yes, we like to say that in DI, doing well equals doing good, and vice versa. We talked about documentation. If, McKinsey publishes reports annually on the impact of DEI. They have that, reports based on ethnicity, diversity, or gender diversity. They bring a lot of insight. So we know that on the people side, companies that have diversity make faster decisions, better decisions. From the brand perspective, brands that actually are truly equitable and inclusive, and by truly, I mean they are relevant and they are credible in their actions as brands, they have higher and consumer preference, and employer brands have higher attractiveness as well. So companies that have a more well-rounded EVP, employee value proposition, attract more and better candidates as well. This is also well documented. And as a business, there is a strong correlation between diverse teams and business performance in terms of growth and profitability and profits per employee as well. So this is all documented, and I'm not going to talk too much about that. Now, one issue, a big issue, is that the conversation was very active, has been very active for 5 years now. Of course, with the tragedy of George Floyd happening in 2020, the discourse, the attention to the matter went through the roof, and everybody started talking or caring or doing more about DEI. The issues that it brought, besides the fragmentation of the issue that we already talked about, is that, for instance, many companies started prioritizing DI without necessarily having a strategy or a connection between DI and business strategy. So, for instance, that's also based on research we did. Many organizations recruited DEI leaders. Now, there has been a lot of tokenism around that. Either they were recruited because they were immigrants, or they were Black, or they were part of the LGBTQ community, or many other representations, right? Without giving them proper training and or equipping them to do the job, or space and autonomy and investment for them to actually effect change, right? So that has happened quite a lot. So as a result of that activity, frenetic activity in the AI, what's been happening is a little bit of fatigue. People in organizations are becoming fatigued. There's a lot of bombardment of information and training and initiatives and compliance. And at some point, people are not seeing much difference, and they are becoming like paralyzed, or I don't know what to do. To your point, I don't know how I can win, and retreat. So that's a big issue. That's really the proverbial shooting yourself in the foot, right? So you want to do good, but you end up becoming paralyzed. And the other thing that is happening is, again, on the employer brand, is attrition. You will probably have a lot of data in the area that many companies are investing in websites, their employment websites, their recruitment websites, their recruitment processes, and talking wonderful things about what's life like in that organization and why they actually support diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then, let's say, a person from a minority, underrepresented minority, joins the company. They join, and the onboarding is not great, or the managers don't know how to manage that, or really how to incorporate their views. So that person will likely be unhappy, will likely be less productive, and ultimately might leave. And again, we have in our clients, and of course, the statistics there that show that the attrition rate for diverse employees, or employees representing minorities, tend to have to demonstrate high attrition rate. So yeah, so these are the issues on the why question, why DEI? So it's not only what you talk about, it's actually what you do about, frame why it's important for your organization and do it properly, even if it means doing less, but do it well.
Absolutely.
That's
Now, before you get to the what, I do want to make a couple comments.
Sure.
You're my second Smart Inclusion speaker to invoke George Floyd, if you will, and because this was one of the drivers of what's turning into kind of a movement about better representation and leveling that playing field. You also touched on tokenism, which is something that another speaker mentioned, like in this day and age, right? Because he was telling me a story about how he was asked to serve on a board, and they didn't appeal to him on a basis of his skills and, like what he would bring to the table. He just kind of knew they wanted him in the photograph, right? And I was a little shocked because that goes all the way back, like that's tokenism is still alive and well. And then the other thing you mentioned was strategy, because that has to dovetail into everything in the company, not just for DEI, right? But for training, for coaching, recruiting, onboarding. In fact, that's the key, right? Like, how are you going to deliver that value proposition that you've got on your website? Because if you don't have that authenticity, that's when your retention rate, people will figure it out pretty quickly.
Exactly.
Right? Okay, so I just wanted to point that out, because what you're saying really resonated with a lot of things that have been touched on in this series of conversations. So this to me is the heart of it in so many ways, is that that why, right?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
so now let's go to the what and the who.
Yes, and your question actually reminded of a point that I would like to stress about the putting your money where your mouth is. It is also well documented now in the past month or so, how many organizations, many big organizations, are laying off employees. I'm not going to name names, but it's out there every day on the paper. And incredibly, a lot of these layoffs are of DI leaders and DI teams. Many companies are cutting out DI departments recently. Believe it or not, if you can do a search on the newspaper, you're going to find that. So that's for me another example that yes, DEI needs to be taken seriously. Many companies, especially listed companies, have to publish DI reports and CSR reports by law, right? But then when there is a crisis and you cut things that you believe are costs, right? And unfortunately, within those costs, a lot of DI professionals are being laid off.
Well, pick anything in HR,
Right. It's incredible. It is incredible. I find it incredible because it is well documented, the relationship between HR, between talent, and of course, as a subset, DI, proper strategy, right? But there you go. I think if there are leaders listening to us here, hopefully they can actually encourage their organizations to really think strategically about DI, not as a knee-jerk reaction and just something that you do to pacify the mood, the morale.
Yeah, agreed. It needs to be baked into the cake.
Exactly.
It needs to be baked into the cake and become part of, like when we talk about DEI training, not really. You have your overall employment training. Everybody has to go through the security training. Everybody has to go through whatever job training there is. This needs to be just folded right into all of that activity.
Absolutely. So now I'm ready to talk about the what. And thank you for the segue about talking about baked in. I like, it's exactly that. We know that. I like also talking about the eye and the tip of the iceberg. So when you ask, I was having a conversation with a super senior HR leader in a tech company this week, actually, and I was interviewing her for a paper I'm writing. I want to write at the moment, which is about DI metrics around DI. And I asked her, does your organization measure DI? Do you take it seriously? Do you measure? And she went, oh, yes, we measure everything. We measure the whole employee experience. We measure how many candidates we have in our pipeline. We measure the breakdown. We measure so on and so forth, right? How many are promoted into C-suite. And, yes, there's metrics of representation across. So I asked her, do you measure who is promoted and who's not promoted? Do you measure the, how you handle the promotion process? Oh, yes, we measure. We measure that for each promotion, we have to have representation. I don't remember the quota necessarily that she talked about, but we have 5 candidates for each new vacancy or for each vacancy. We do succession planning. For succession planning, we have to have representation in that short list. But do you measure who actually gets promoted comparatively? Oh, actually, no. Actually, no, apart from the overall metrics, right? So there you go. So then I went on into explaining the difference between diversity, which is actually it's a representation metric, and inclusion and equity, which are completely different things. You can have representation and not have inclusion. You can have inclusion and not have equity. Because for us, equity is the ultimate measure of actual lived experiences. And I explained that to her. And then she went, oh, wow, I am learning. And bear in mind that they are actually a fairly advanced organization in DI. And she says, oh, wow, yes, no, we do not have that many soft metrics that will actually give us an indication of how we are doing in equity in organizations. So it's an important distinction because the representation is measurable, is the tip of the iceberg. And I want to talk about what's underneath that huge iceberg that drives equity in the end. So for us, there's lots of studies out there as well, and we simplified those drivers into 3 groups, and that's to do with the what you can do, right? There's the leadership and culture aspect, and that's an area that many organizations are investing in or on. So, of course, in leadership, especially big organizations, we have leaders talking about DI, many doing training DI, many are appointing DI leaders. So that's advanced in many organizations. But there's an element that many are not doing yet, which is actually living. We talk about walking the talk of leadership. So are you making decisions based on what you want to drive? Are you actually promoting the right people? Are you promoting people into senior positions because they are inclusive leaders amongst other performance measures, or only because they are performing well in the traditional metrics, right? So that's something that's still not happening. And of course, inclusive culture. Like I said, inclusive culture is not only doing the training. Of course, compliance training and unconscious bias training is a very good beginning and necessary in the case of compliance. But culture goes beyond that. Culture goes about practicing. Are you encouraging people to practice having courageous conversation? Are you encouraging employees to talk to people who are different from them in I don't like even using the empathy word because it's becoming very jargony, but are you talking from a human angle, trying to really understand if their life experiences are indeed different to yours, because we assume things. We assume so many things. So are you encouraging people to not assume anything? The other pillar would be equity, goals, and strategy. And we talked about strategy. So a lot of people are doing activities in DI, but not connecting them to growth, to how is actually empowering your people or strengthening your actual business strategy as well in terms of talent. Are you promoting a space for people to emerge and perform well because they can and because they're valued? Yeah, so that's the equity, goals, and strategy. And again, are you sharing those goals and strategy? Are you cascading those goals down to the individual level so that I actually know what I should be doing differently? Many are not, right? So the whole strategy and goals and impact measures need to be created, and therefore subsequently integrated to overall strategy. And the third one is, again, a lot of people talk about that, is the whole people experience. And there's two sides to every story. There's the people experience that you think you're delivering to your employees, right? And there's employees' actual lived experiences. What are they experiencing on the job? We need to be alert to that. We need to have research methodologies that help us understand those blind spots. And then we include representation. You talked about recruiting. We talked about having a good employer brand, training your teams to actually welcome people in the way that they should be welcomed at onboarding. You asked me about training. You talk about training. Yes. I personally don't like talking about training. I don't like the word training. I like the word enablement, equipping people, right? One area that is frequently overlooked is equipping or training in inclusive leadership, and we're not talking only about top leaders. We're talking about some, more often than not, middle management or people who are managers of managers, managers of leaders, managers of people. Because your leader, your CEO, will talk all the right things, but where do we live our experience? It's actually the day-to-day job. If I go to my manager and my manager, is not aware of what can hurt people, or even how to handle queries, or how to handle dissatisfaction in a human way, all your efforts will go down the drain. So if you ask me, where should we invest our money in training, I would say train your people to have those courageous conversations, and to your managers to have inclusive leadership. And then the other pain point that is huge as well, and I mentioned already, is on the promotion side. People promote people not having much awareness of their biases. We tend to promote, that's a natural thing. We tend to promote people who are like us, we feel comfortable with, and that's a big, big problem. If we do have those unconscious biases, and we do have those, so it's even us who are very, very mindful, we'll have an initial tendency to be comfortable with people like us. This has to stop. There's a very simple method for that. For every decision you take, stop and think. Is this decision being driven by fact, by evidence, or my belief? Can I support my belief in practical terms? That needs to be trained. That needs to be enabled and required by people.
We say that in sales, okay? People always make an emotional decision. Right? They gather all the facts, right? But ultimately, the lizard brain is the one that decides, right? That you mentioned a couple things I want to touch on that we've talked about as well, and that it starts with an assessment of yourself, right? Because sometimes you don't know what the problems are. Like management thinks things are one way, but the people in the trenches are doing the work think another. So that self-assessment is can be a bitter pill to swallow. And also you mentioned equipping people. People need to be given the tools and the resources to come to work as their natural selves and do their best work every day. And that's how to really create that human-centric workplace that you're describing. So, okay, did we talk about who yet?
I will talk about who. I have a final point about the what, which is, we talked about the why we should do DI, how important it is, important for everyone, and the what can be done. The final what, there's training. People need to know how to behave, but also there's a what about baking into processes what needs to be done, but also consequences for things that are not done as well. Like we need to have, like we do quality assurance for everything. So that needs to be an inherent control, quality control and quality assurance for decisions that are made. So frankly, I work with that, but I see very little, managers or proper calibration on promotion decisions to really be totally inclusive. Now, I've talked about the who. The who is a very quick topic.
The who is, I'm sorry, who?
Myself. It's a quick topic to talk about. The who is everyone, as simple as that. And hence, everyone needs to be equipped to understand that my interaction with you, Sylvia, will have a consequence, right? If I'm rude to you, or if I ignore you, I ignore that that we are speaking from very different time zones, and I extend a meeting or ask for a meeting to work at my time, and it's 3 a.m. your time. Oh my God, that's really not inclusive. So, this working well together with others requires that level of caring about others. So yes, the leaders are accountable for DI, but the responsibility for bringing it to life, it rests with everyone. Either if you are a representative of a minority, for you to speak up, being equipped to do so and having the space to do so, or if you're a manager, making sure that you are alert and you are creating that space for harmonious, and sometimes not always harmonious, but transparent and honest, courageous conversations, because that's the only way that we can advance. Stop with the assumptions, stop with the mechanization of initiatives, and really truly care. And then we close the loop as to go back to the why. Why we're doing that? Because we know it's important.
Great.
So that's what I had to say.
Well, I do have one last question, though, in the time that we
Sure.
have left, and that's what else do leaders need to consider for driving their DEI initiatives?
Okay, so you caught me there because I said I was going to talk about three, the why, the what, and and the who, and I have a how. So I would encourage every leader, every DI person, everyone really in personal lives, to think about how you can deliver, how we can deliver as leaders that. And we talked about blind spots, and we talked about trying to do too many things in a fragmented, if not integrated way. So I would suggest that do have stop a moment to think about what is your roadmap. Listen to your organization, generate your insight, understand what your blind spots, what your organization is asking for, and don't try to do everything at the same time together. Really prioritize, create a roadmap rather, because DI, we got to this state of exclusion for over 200 years. We cannot change everything overnight, right? That's not to say that we shouldn't strive to change, but really create a roadmap, get the basics right first, and then add, your next priority, walk before you can run. But whatever you do, don't stop. It's better to go slow than not going at all. Keep going.
Yes.
And
in fact, two of my heroes have said words to that effect, right? Like there was Dr. Martin Luther King, right?
Yeah.
That the arc is long, right? But it bends towards justice. And then Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that incremental change is how we get to lasting change. So there might even be 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but you want to go, if you want to go far, that's an African proverb, right? If you want to go far, go with everybody, right? Go together.
Exactly. And then bring your people with you, with the equipping them understanding why they are doing things differently, enabling them to do things differently, and have those rewards and consequences in place. Be courageous. Don't go promoting people, just because they are fantastic salespeople. That as well. But if they're not inclusive leaders, think about that. Are they, leading your culture to be more toxic or whatever? So it's a collective issue as well.
That's great. I like that. Be courageous. That's
yeah.
Well, that's your, what is your motto? Anything's possible, or there's a solution for everything, right?
There's a solution for everything.
There's a solution for everything, right? And that's always there's always going to be a new challenge, and then there'll be a solution for that as well. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Ana. I sure do appreciate you taking the time and sharing your experience and your wisdom with the HR community and the recruiters out there that are listening today. And, here at SmartSearch, as we're developing our technology platform to support diversity in hiring, onboarding and inclusion, in that we provide tools, right? And that's why we're talking to thought leaders like you about what are those practical solutions? Like, what do people really need to get the job done to create that more diverse and inclusive workplace? So very, very
Yeah.
grateful.
So
Thank
well
you so
done.
much.
Well done for doing what you do and in developing those tools. And thank you for opening space for this very important conversation. And I'm so grateful for you for having me here to talk. So and I look forward to speak to you soon.
Awesome. Thanks again.